The sirens began before dawn. A low, metallic wail rolled across the mist-drenched airfield, bending the stillness into panic. Men shouted, boots thudded against mud, and somewhere near the hangar, a crate of ammunition toppled, scattering shells like dice. The rumble of distant engines followed, German bombers, closing fast. Corporal Jack Mercer wiped his hands on a rag already black with oil and grit. His back ached from 20 hours straight under the fuselage of a grounded Spitfire, but his eyes were sharp. "Don't stop," he barked over the rising noise. "Get that fuel line patched, she flies or we die trying." The mechanic crouched beside him hesitated, looking toward the horizon where streaks of light began to break through the fog. Mercer slammed the wrench into his hand. "Move, Sam. You want to explain to the pilots why their birds are still grounded when the bombs start falling?" A distant boom punctuated his words. The ground trembled, dust trickling from the rafters above. Mercer felt the vibration in his ribs before the sound reached his ears. He didn't flinch. He'd felt worse, the shudder of engines dying midair, the silence of radios that never spoke again. "Bombers inbound," someone screamed. The hangar doors shuddered open, and a streak of light flashed overhead. The first bomb struck 2 hangars over. Fire swallowed the sky. Mercer's men dove for cover. He stayed crouched beneath the wing, his fingers working the wrench like it was an extension of his arm. The heat of the explosion washed over him. A gust of wind carried smoke and the acrid tang of burning rubber. 5 more seconds, he muttered, mostly to himself. The engine roared to life just as another blast rocked the ground. Shrapnel pinged off the metal skin of the Spitfire. Mercer slid out from beneath it, coughing through the haze, eyes watering. The pilot sprinted across the tarmac, helmet under his arm. "She's ready?" "She'll fly," Mercer shouted. "Don't ask how long." The pilot climbed in, the propeller slicing through smoke as the plane lurched forward, gaining speed. Mercer watched it lift off, a lone streak of defiance against the dark. For one breath, he felt triumph. Then the next bomb hit. He was thrown backward. His head slammed against the ground. For a moment, there was no sound, only the ringing inside his skull. When his vision cleared, he saw flames devouring what had been Hangar C. Men ran in every direction, shadows against fire. "Mercer. You alive?" Sergeant Collins appeared through the smoke, half his face black with soot. "Alive enough," Mercer coughed, pushing himself upright. "Status?" "Half the fleet's gone. Command says we're relocating by morning." "Relocating with what planes?" Mercer snapped. "They're all in pieces." Collins didn't answer. His eyes said enough. The sirens wailed again, weaker this time, and then cut out altogether. The airfield was dying. When the attack finally ended, the silence was worse than the noise. Smoke hung heavy in the air, turning the rising sun into a dull orange smear. The surviving plane sat wounded in the mud, fuselages torn, propellers twisted like broken fingers. The medics moved among the bodies, covering faces Mercer recognized. He picked his way through the wreckage, every step sinking into ash and oil. The smell of burned metal mixed with something else, something human. His throat tightened. He stopped beside a crater where an aircraft engine lay half-buried. He knelt, brushing dirt from the serial plate. It belonged to Captain Harris. The same Harris who'd shared cigarettes with him 3 nights ago, laughing about nothing at all. "Damn it, Jack," Collins muttered beside him. "You can't bring them all back." Mercer stared at the engine. "I can bring their planes back." Collins looked at him like he'd lost his mind, but he didn't argue. He just handed him a flask and walked away. By noon, the officers called a meeting in the operations tent. What was left of the squadron crowded around a cracked table map. The air was thick with exhaustion and disbelief. Major Dalton's voice carried above the murmurs. We've lost 70% of our aircraft. Command's orders are clear, this airfield must be combat-ready in 48 hours. A mechanic snorted. With what, sir? Paper wings? Dalton's gaze swept the room. You're soldiers. You'll find a way. Dismissed. Mercer lingered. When the others filed out, he spoke quietly. Major, we can't meet that deadline with the parts we've got. Most of the engines are scrap. Then make them not scrap, Dalton said without looking up. We need those birds in the sky. Mercer clenched his jaw. That's not how machines work. The major finally met his eyes. Then change how they work. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the faint echo of distant artillery. Mercer stood for a long time beside the ruined planes, feeling the weight of the command settle on his shoulders. Around him, the airfield moved like a hive, men dragging debris, hammering panels, shouting orders, but he saw only the broken shapes of the aircraft, their wings bent like the bones of fallen giants. He walked to the edge of the field where the ground sloped toward a line of burned trees. A small photo was pinned under a stone, a pilot's family, faces frozen in smiles. Mercer stared at it, the edges curling from the heat. He thought of his own brother, Daniel, shot down last year over the channel. They'd never found the body. He could still hear his voice in the radio static, "Keep them flying, Jack. That's all that matters." Now, surrounded by twisted metal and silence, those words felt like a curse. He turned back toward the hangar, his steps slow but steady. Inside, the smell of fuel was stronger than ever. The remaining mechanics were sorting parts, what little could be salvaged. Sam looked up from a pile of bent pistons. "Sir, we're out of replacements for the cooling valves. The last ones melted in the fire." "Then we'll make them," Mercer said. Sam blinked. "Out of what?" Mercer scanned the wreckage. "Whatever's left. We've got scrap from 5 different aircraft models. If they fit once, they can fit again, with help." "That's madness," another mechanic muttered. "Maybe," Mercer said, already reaching for a wrench. "But we're out of sanity anyway." They worked through the afternoon, scavenging usable pieces, welding and reshaping until the parts looked almost compatible. Mercer drew diagrams in chalk on the hangar floor, arrows and circles linking fragments from different machines. His voice carried calm authority even when his hands trembled. "See this? The coupling from the Typhoon fits the Mustang's carburetor line if you shave the threading. It won't last forever, but it'll get her airborne." The men followed his instructions without question. The rhythm of tools replaced the silence, clanging, hammering, the hiss of torches. It wasn't order, not yet, but it was movement. By dusk, one engine sputtered to life. It wasn't pretty, but it ran. Sam whooped. Mercer only nodded, sweat and grime streaking his face. "Good. That's one. We need 20 more." The night deepened. Outside, the fires from the morning raid still smoldered, painting the clouds with dull red light. Inside the hangar, the shadows stretched long over the floor as the men worked by lanterns. Mercer's eyes burned from fatigue, but he couldn't stop. He'd found something to fight the helplessness, a rhythm, a purpose. At midnight, he stepped outside for air. The wind was cold, carrying the faint hum of distant aircraft. He tilted his head up, scanning the dark sky. Somewhere out there, another squadron was fighting, relying on planes that hadn't yet fallen apart. He imagined Daniel among them, grinning through the radio, "You always did fix the impossible." The thought tightened his throat. "Sir?" Sam's voice came from behind him. "We're almost ready with the second engine." Mercer nodded but didn't turn around. His eyes were fixed on the horizon. Smoke drifted low over the fields, glowing faintly under the moonlight. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "they'll ask us to fly again. Do you think we can?" Mercer exhaled. We'll have to. He returned to the hangar, where the others were already back at work. Their faces looked ghostly in the flickering lantern light, streaked with soot, exhaustion, and something else, belief. Not in miracles, but in Mercer's certainty. Every clang of metal echoed like a heartbeat. Every spark felt like defiance. When dawn crept over the shattered field, Mercer stood in the doorway, watching the smoke thin into morning mist. The planes still looked broken, but now they seemed alive, each one a wounded creature refusing to die. He wiped his hands, the rag falling apart in his grip. The exhaustion hit him like a wave, but beneath it was a flicker of resolve. He glanced at the makeshift chalk diagrams on the floor, the strange patchwork of ideas that shouldn't have worked but somehow did. He could see the shape of something forming, not just repairs, but a system. A way to make broken things fly again. The others were too tired to notice the change in his expression. He whispered to himself, the words almost lost in the wind. If they can't give us parts, I'll build us time. Somewhere beyond the horizon, engines droned, a reminder that the war hadn't paused to let them recover. Mercer straightened, rolled his shoulders, and picked up his wrench once more. The day had barely begun. He turned back to his men, voice steady. Let's show them what impossible looks like. And as the sun rose over the ruined airfield, the first repaired Spitfire shuddered, coughed, and roared to life, its propeller slicing through the dawn. For the first time since the bombs fell, the sound of flight returned to the sky. But Mercer didn't smile. He only watched, silent, as the plane climbed higher, his reflection caught in its metal skin, tired eyes, soot-streaked face, and the faintest shadow of hope. He didn't know yet that this desperate night would spark something far greater than survival. All he knew was that the sky was still theirs, at least for one more day. Rain came in hard, slanting sheets that turned the airfield into a pit of black mud and fractured light. The fires had long burned out, leaving behind only the reek of oil, singed metal, and despair. For 3 days the sky hadn't cleared, and for 3 days Jack Mercer had not left the hangar. He moved like a ghost through the wreckage, eyes bloodshot, jaw unshaven, his uniform streaked with grease and rainwater. Every inch of him trembled from exhaustion, but his mind refused to stop. On a workbench cluttered with twisted bolts, melted bearings, and half-cleaned carburetors, he drew new diagrams in charcoal. Circles, arrows, measurements scrawled across whatever scrap paper he could find, ration forms, torn maps, even the side of a wooden crate. "Sir," Sam said, stepping carefully over a pile of broken tools. "We've been at this for 70 hours straight. The men can't keep their eyes open." Mercer didn't look up. "Neither can I." "That's not what I—" "Then wake them anyway." Mercer wiped his sleeve across his face, smearing a line of grease along his cheek. "We're close." Sam hesitated. He wanted to argue, but one look at Mercer's eyes stopped him. They weren't wild, they were something worse, determined. A man chasing an idea too far to turn back. By morning, what remained of the mechanic crew had gathered in the hangar. The rain hadn't stopped, it clattered against the roof like 1,000 ticking clocks. Mercer stood before them beside an aircraft engine stripped to its skeleton. "Command wants us operational in 2 days," he began, voice hoarse. "We don't have the parts, and we don't have the time. So we're going to stop pretending we need either." The men exchanged uneasy glances. Mercer picked up a twisted hunk of metal and dropped it on the table with a clang. "This," he said, was an Allison engine mount. The fire bent it 6 degrees off-center. "Normally, that makes it useless. But if we shave down the coupling, use these modified bolts," he held up 3 mismatched pieces salvaged from different models, "we can fit it into a Merlin housing. Not perfect, but functional." "That's insane," muttered one mechanic. Mercer nodded. "Exactly. So let's see if insanity works faster than logic." And with that, the madness began. The hangar became a world unto itself, a living machine of noise and movement. Sparks cascaded like falling stars as torches hissed and drills screamed. Men shouted to be heard over engines coughing to life. The air grew thick with the smell of acetylene and sweat. Mercer orchestrated it all, darting between workstations, barking instructions, sketching solutions in the dust. His hands moved faster than his thoughts, driven by instinct more than reason. At first, the results were catastrophic. A fuel line burst, spraying the wall with a fine mist of fire. A piston cracked under pressure, nearly taking a man's hand with it. Mercer patched wounds and engines alike, cursing himself for every failure, then returning to the work as if pain were another tool to be used. Late that night, Lieutenant Reeves walked in. His flight jacket still glistened with rain, the emblem on his shoulder faded from too many missions. He was younger than Mercer but carried himself like someone who'd seen too much sky and too many friends fall from it. "What the hell is going on in here?" he asked, surveying the chaos. Mercer didn't look up from the carburetor he was welding. "Miracles. Or madness. Haven't decided yet." Reeves stepped closer, watching as Mercer forced a bolt into place with a hammer. "You're going to kill someone with that contraption. Better than letting them die waiting for a replacement part." Reeves folded his arms. "You think you can just rewrite the laws of mechanics because command's desperate?" "I don't think," Mercer said evenly. "I know." Reeves leaned on the table, lowering his voice. "Look, I get it. You've got your pride. But these machines aren't toys. You send a man up in one of your patched-together Frankenplanes, and he's not coming back." Mercer straightened, his eyes sharp despite the exhaustion. "You think I don't know what it costs when a plane doesn't come back?" The air went still. Reeves looked away first. Mercer turned back to his engine. "Either help or get out of my hangar." For a moment Reeves said nothing. Then, slowly, he peeled off his gloves and reached for a wrench. "You'll owe me if this blows up." Mercer almost smiled. "If it blows up, you won't have to collect." By dawn, the system had started to take shape. They worked through the storm, merging parts from aircraft that had never been meant to share a sky, Typhoons, Spitfires, Mustangs, all spliced together into something strange and functional. Mercer's mind mapped every detail, which valve could substitute for another, how to align mismatched rods using improvised spacers, how to weld around fractures so the stress flowed differently. It wasn't repair anymore. It was re-engineering. When the first prototype engine roared to life, the sound was uneven but steady. Sparks flew, gears rattled, and then the rhythm settled into something that almost sounded like confidence. The men cheered. Mercer didn't. He was already noting the vibrations, the tone shifts, the slight delay in throttle response. "It works," Sam said. "Not yet," Mercer muttered. "But it will." Reeves watched from the doorway, arms crossed. "You might have just created the ugliest, most brilliant engine in Europe." Mercer smirked faintly. "Ugly things survive wars better than beautiful ones." Word spread fast. Pilots began drifting to the hangar, drawn by rumor. Some laughed at the sight of patchwork planes, their skins mismatched like patchwork quilts. Others just stared in wonder. "Are these safe?" one pilot asked. Mercer didn't look up from his notes. "Define safe." That earned nervous chuckles. But when the next day's test flight succeeded, a full circuit and landing without incident, those laughs turned to applause. The mad mechanic had done what supply lines and engineering divisions could not, get them flying again. Within hours, new orders flooded in. Every damaged aircraft on the field was dragged to Mercer's hangar. His team worked without rest. Sleep became irrelevant. Food tasted like fuel. Their hands were blistered, their eyes bloodshot, but every repaired plane that lifted off was a kind of victory. Then, during the fourth night, the sirens returned. The German bombers came without warning, low and fast, their searchlights slicing through the rain. The airfield erupted once more in chaos. Men scattered, engines roared, and tracer fire turned the night into a storm of light. Mercer shouted for his men to take cover, but the hangar was a death trap. Bullets tore through the corrugated walls, sparks leaping from the metal. A bomb hit nearby, shaking the ground so violently that the half-assembled fuselage toppled from its stand. Sam dived aside, narrowly avoiding being crushed. "Get the engines out!" Mercer yelled, dragging a toolbox toward the door. Reeves grabbed the other end, the two of them hauling it across the mud as another explosion split the night. They reached a trench on the far side of the airfield, dragging engines one by one into makeshift shelters dug from the earth. Rain poured down in torrents, turning the ground to sludge. Reeves slipped, falling hard into the mud. Mercer hauled him up, shouting over the wind. "You still think I'm insane?" Reeves spat out dirt. "More than ever." A bomb fell close enough to throw them both to the ground. Dirt and debris rained down. When Mercer opened his eyes, everything was ringing. He rolled over, checking Reeves, who was alive but bleeding from a gash above his brow. "Stay down," Mercer said, pulling him against the trench wall. Reeves laughed weakly. "This your idea of innovation?" "Adaptation," Mercer corrected. "Now shut up and hold the wrench." The bombing lasted less than 20 minutes, though it felt like hours. When the smoke finally lifted, the airfield was scarred anew, craters where runways had been, hangars flattened. But somehow, Mercer's engines had survived. Covered in mud, dented and scorched, but intact. As dawn broke, the surviving crew stumbled out of the trenches. The rain had stopped, leaving the world quiet except for the hiss of cooling metal. Mercer stood at the edge of the field, staring at the ruins. Behind him, Reeves spoke softly. "You know, when I called you mad, I didn't think you'd take it as a compliment." Mercer didn't answer right away. His gaze moved from the wreckage to the engines they'd saved. "Madness kept us alive," he said finally. "Maybe it's worth holding on to." Over the next 2 days, the airfield became a proving ground. Mercer refined his designs, sketching new variations directly onto the floorboards. He began cataloging parts by shape and stress tolerance rather than model number. A Merlin piston could fit a Typhoon cylinder with enough modification, a propeller shaft from a downed Mustang could balance a Spitfire's torque if cut at the right angle. It was chaos made methodical. Reeves, despite his skepticism, became Mercer's test pilot. Together they flew the patched-up aircraft through rain and wind, pushing them to their limits. Each flight returned with problems: overheating, vibration, imbalance, and each time Mercer tore the plane apart and rebuilt it, faster and smarter. After the 10th flight, Reeves landed, cutting the engine with a grin. "You've done it, Jack. It's not madness anymore." Mercer wiped the sweat from his brow, eyes half-lidded with exhaustion. "Oh, it's still madness. It just works now." That night, the officers visited the hangar. Major Dalton himself inspected the planes, running a hand along the uneven seams, the mismatched bolts, the crude welds. "You're telling me these are airworthy?" he asked. Mercer nodded. "They've been flying all week." Dalton gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "You've somehow turned junk into a combat-ready fleet. Command will want a report on how." "Tell them it was necessity," Mercer said quietly. "And a little insanity." Dalton gave him a long look before leaving. When the hangar finally emptied, Mercer sank onto a crate, every muscle trembling. The others were asleep where they'd fallen, on toolboxes, against walls, curled under wings. The only sound was the slow tick of cooling engines. He stared at the planes, their mismatched skins catching the lantern light. They were ugly, scarred, imperfect, and alive. A strange pride filled him, mixed with exhaustion so deep it hurt. Reeves stirred nearby, murmuring in his sleep. Mercer smiled faintly. You were right, he whispered. It's madness. Outside, the first streaks of dawn cut through the clouds, glinting off the aircraft like the promise of another day. For the first time since the war began, Mercer allowed himself to breathe. His system wasn't theory anymore, it was proof. Proof that even in chaos, something new could be born. But deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The machines could fly, yes, but war never stayed still. And soon, someone would test just how far his madness could go. The morning after the storm broke clean and cold, a thin frost crusting the ruined tarmac. The air smelled of fuel and dawn, sharp, metallic, alive again. Engines growled across the field, one after another, patched-up aircraft shaking off the mud of their graves. The noise was thunder reborn. Jack Mercer stood near the runway, coat collar turned up against the wind, eyes narrowed to slits. The first squadron lifted into the pale sky, their patched wings glinting like scars in sunlight. His hands were trembling, not from cold but from disbelief. The mad mechanics system, his system, worked. What should have taken weeks had taken days. Behind him, Sam jogged up, wiping grease from his forehead. That's 24 birds airborne, sir. 24. His voice cracked halfway through the sentence. Mercer allowed himself a breath that felt too heavy to release. Let's see if they come back. Sam looked skyward, the tiny silhouettes climbing higher. They will. But Mercer said nothing. He'd learned that hope was a dangerous tool, sharp enough to fix you, sharper still to cut you apart. By afternoon, the news spread beyond their field. Other bases were asking for Mercer's diagrams, his notes, his impossible repair method. Command wanted details, procedures, reports. He ignored most of it. He didn't have time for paperwork while engines still coughed like dying men. When Reeves returned from patrol, his flight jacket was dusted with frost, his grin wild. We hit their supply trains near Arras. Flew half the route on one of your mongrels. She held steady, Jack. Not a cough. Mercer studied him, the energy, the relief, the light in his eyes that had been gone for weeks. What about casualties? 2 planes down, Reeves said softly. But the rest made it. We've never done that before. The words sank in slowly. For the first time, their squadron had returned mostly intact. That night, the men celebrated in the hangar. Someone smuggled in a bottle of whiskey, someone else found a gramophone that still worked. The music was scratchy and faint, but it filled the cracks in their silence. Mercer sat apart, on a crate near the engines, watching them laugh. He should have joined in. Instead, he stared at the machines, the ugly, rattling miracles that refused to die. Reeves found him there, offering a tin cup half filled with whiskey. You saved them, you know. Mercer took the cup but didn't drink. I kept them alive long enough to risk dying again. That's all. You ever let yourself feel proud? Pride doesn't stop bullets. Reeves laughed quietly, shaking his head. You sound like my father. I hope he survived the war better than I'm surviving this one. Reeves leaned against the engine, tilting his head. You're not surviving, Jack. You're winning. Mercer didn't answer. The word winning felt wrong. He wasn't sure war had winners, only those still breathing. 2 days later, the next crisis arrived. The German counteroffensive had begun. Bombings intensified. The front shifted dangerously close, and half the squadron was grounded again, wings torn, hydraulics shot, engines coughing blood. Major Dalton arrived at dawn, uniform immaculate despite the mud, his tone clipped and urgent. Mercer, I need 20 planes ready by sundown. We're launching a retaliatory strike tonight. Mercer's stomach turned. Sundown? Sir, we'll burn the engines out if we rush. Dalton's gaze hardened. Then let them burn. We can't afford delay. Mercer wanted to argue, but the Major's eyes said there was no choice. The war didn't pause for logic. Back in the hangar, he gathered his crew. "We've got 12 hours, he said simply. No one complained. They just moved. The hours that followed blurred into noise and exhaustion. The air was thick with fumes, the heat from the welding torches scorched their faces. Hands bled freely. Voices rasped from shouting over the roar of engines. Mercer's own heartbeat felt mechanical, steady, relentless, cold. Sam fainted twice but returned to work each time. Reeves helped haul fuel drums, his pilot's gloves blackened with grease. The mechanics had stopped seeing ranks or roles. They were one machine, and Mercer was its pulse. By evening, the sky burned orange with sunset. The first engine coughed to life. Then another. The hangar filled with smoke and thunder until it felt like standing inside a storm. Reeves climbed into his plane, goggles already smeared with oil. "You sure she'll hold?" "No," Mercer said honestly. "But she'll fly." Reeves grinned, slapped the fuselage, and shouted over the noise, "Then I'll make her dance." Mercer watched as the squadron took off one by one, streaking toward the horizon. He stood alone long after the last plane vanished. The wind whipped his hair, carrying the faint smell of fuel and fear. Hours crawled by. Night fell. The base radio crackled with static, half-messages, coordinates, screams, silence. Mercer sat by the receiver, unmoving, his face lit only by the dim glow of the instrument panel. Each time a voice faded, his heart seemed to stop. Then Reeves' voice broke through the static, "Target hit, returning. Engines holding." Mercer closed his eyes, releasing a breath that trembled. Around him, the men began to cheer. By dawn, 17 of the 20 planes had returned. 3 didn't. 17 men walked back into the hangar, soot-streaked and smiling. 3 didn't. Mercer didn't celebrate. He waited by the runway until sunrise painted the sky pale gold. Then he turned back toward the hangar, where Reeves found him cleaning tools with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "They called it a victory," Reeves said softly. Mercer didn't look up. "And what do you call it?" Reeves hesitated. "A reprieve." "Exactly." Mercer's voice was flat. "A brief one." He stood and walked toward one of the planes still warm from flight. Its metal skin was riddled with bullet holes, its wings trembling from the strain. He touched the fuselage as though it were a wounded animal. "These machines aren't supposed to come back from that," he said. "Neither are we." Reeves watched him quietly. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe they come back because you made them believe they could." Mercer gave a short, humorless laugh. "Belief doesn't hold bolts together." "Maybe not. But it keeps men from falling apart." The next weeks blurred into an endless rhythm of repairs and sorties. Every night the bombers returned, every morning Mercer's crew rebuilt what the fire had not claimed. His system had spread across 3 bases now. Mechanics in other regions were copying his notes, improvising their own miracles. Command called it the Mercer method. He hated the name. It made it sound clean, rational, safe. It wasn't. It was desperation formalized. He slept less, spoke little. His hands grew calloused beyond feeling. When he looked in the mirror, he barely recognized the man staring back, a hollowed face, eyes rimmed in shadow. Reeves worried. "You need rest," he said one evening, catching Mercer half-collapsed over a workbench. "There's no rest," Mercer murmured. "Every hour I sleep, another plane falls." "Then what happens when you fall?" Reeves asked. Mercer didn't answer. He didn't have to. They both knew there was no place to fall except the ground. That night, while patching an engine, a flashback hit him, the sound of his brother's laughter, the static on the radio, the silence that followed. He dropped the wrench, trembling. Sam's voice cut through the fog. "Sir, you all right?" Mercer forced a nod. "Fine. Keep working." But he wasn't fine. He was unraveling, thread by thread. Days later, disaster struck again. A fuel storage explosion tore through the western end of the airfield. The blast flattened 2 hangars, killing 3 mechanics instantly. The shockwave shattered windows, flinging Mercer to the ground. He scrambled to his feet, vision blurred by smoke. "Sam," he shouted. A faint groan answered. He followed the sound, dragging debris aside until he found Sam pinned under a collapsed beam. Blood streaked his temple. "Hold on," Mercer said, voice breaking as he heaved at the beam. His muscles screamed, the metal unmoving. "Hold on, damn it." Reeves appeared, helping him lift. Together they freed Sam, dragging him into the open air. His breathing was shallow, eyes half open. "You're going to make it," Mercer said. Sam's lips twitched into a weak smile. "You always say that." Then he went still. Mercer froze. The rain began again, cold and thin. Reeves put a hand on his shoulder, but Mercer didn't move. The sound of the fire, the screams, the sirens, all faded. There was only the echo of the last word that hadn't been finished. That night, he sat alone outside the ruined hangar, Sam's blood still under his nails. The engines inside hummed faintly in the dark, their rhythmic pulse like a heartbeat. He hated them for it. Reeves joined him silently, handing him a cigarette. Mercer didn't smoke, but he took it anyway, holding it between his fingers like a fuse. "You can't blame yourself," Reeves said quietly. "I built a system to save time," Mercer murmured. "All it's done is cost lives faster. You built hope. Hope doesn't stop dying." Reeves leaned forward, staring into the distance. "Maybe not. But it gives us a reason to keep moving. That's what you've done for us, Jack. You gave us something to move toward." Mercer didn't reply. He stared at the cigarette until it burned down to ash. The next morning, he went back to work. No speeches. No morning. Only the sound of tools and engines filling the silence. The men followed his lead. By the end of the week, the airfield was operational again. Planes lined the runway, rebuilt yet again from the bones of their predecessors. Mercer walked among them, his steps slow, reverent, haunted. Reeves approached, adjusting his gloves. "We're heading out again. The big one this time. They say it might end the fight in the West." Mercer didn't look at him. "Then make sure it does." Reeves nodded, studying his friend. "If I don't come back." "Don't." Mercer's voice was sharp. "You'll come back." Reeves smiled sadly. "You never learned to lie well." He extended a gloved hand. "Whatever happens, Jack, you changed something. You turned despair into motion. That matters." Mercer gripped his hand tightly. "Just fly safe." Reeves climbed into the cockpit. The propeller spun to life, the engine growling, a sound born of Mercer's madness and resolve. Mercer stepped back, watching the planes take off, one after another, their engines screaming into the dawn. The wind caught his coat, the roar of the engines filling his chest like thunder. He raised a hand against the glare, following Reeves' plane until it disappeared into the horizon. He stayed there long after the sky was empty. The silence felt heavier this time, as if the world were holding its breath. He didn't know it yet, but that mission would change everything, his work, his name, his purpose. For now, all he could do was wait. The rain returned the night Reeves didn't. It came in sheets, rattling against the tin roofs of the hangars, drowning the airfield in gray. The storm was merciless, lightning flashed across the horizon, carving the sky open in jagged, blinding veins. Each thunderclap echoed like an artillery shell. Mercer stood at the edge of the runway, coat plastered to his body, eyes fixed on the empty sky. The last of the squadron should have been home hours ago. He could still hear Reeves' last radio call through the static, fragments swallowed by interference, engines failing, still over the ridge, tell Jack, then silence. The kind of silence that doesn't end. When dawn broke, the rain stopped. The airfield was a graveyard of puddles and smoke. Men moved quietly, speaking in half-whispers, as though words might summon bad luck. Mercer hadn't slept. He hadn't left the runway. When the sun rose behind him, cold and indifferent, it revealed the hollowness in his face, the kind that comes when the body is alive but the soul has gone missing. A jeep arrived near midday, carrying what was left of the returning squadron. 7 planes limped in behind it, engines sputtering, metal scorched black. No sign of Reeves. No one said his name. They didn't have to. Major Dalton approached, mud clinging to his boots. "We lost 12 over the ridge," he said flatly. "Your friend was one of them." Mercer didn't answer. He just turned and walked away. Dalton called after him, but his voice was drowned out by the wind. Inside the hangar, Mercer stopped beside Reeves' workbench. His gloves still hung from a hook. His notebook lay open, filled with sketches of wings, notes about drag and lift, and a single unfinished sentence: "Maybe the sky was never meant to be conquered, only borrowed." Mercer closed the notebook slowly, his throat tight. The hangar around him buzzed with the faint hum of machines, the ghosts of laughter and shouting that had once filled the air. Now it all felt wrong, too quiet, too clean, too final. He walked out into the sunlight, his boots heavy with mud. A convoy of trucks rolled past, carrying away the last crates of supplies. The war was shifting elsewhere. Word from command was that the enemy line had broken, the conflict was nearing its end. Victory. But the word sat bitter in Mercer's mouth. What did victory mean to men who had traded everything to keep metal birds in the sky? Days turned to weeks. Planes flew less often. The thunder of engines gave way to a steady, haunting quiet. Men packed up, transferred, went home. The airfield became a skeleton of itself, rows of empty hangars, cracked runways, rusted tools left where hands had dropped them for the last time. Mercer stayed. He worked alone, fixing what no one asked him to fix, as if by keeping the engines alive he could keep the memories from fading. He polished Reeves' plane until the reflection hurt his eyes. He oiled the propellers that would never turn again. The work became ritual, each bolt tightened a prayer, each weld a confession. One evening, as the sun set over the wreckage, a military jeep pulled up beside the hangar. A man in a clean uniform stepped out, Colonel Hayes, the logistics officer who had once dismissed Mercer's reckless methods. He looked older now, wearier. "Mercer," he said, removing his cap. "They're shutting this place down. War's over. You should go home." Mercer didn't look up from the engine he was dismantling. "Home," he said softly. "Where's that supposed to be?" Hayes hesitated. "Anywhere but here." Mercer wiped his hands, leaving streaks of oil across his sleeves. "This is where they are. The men. The work. The ones who didn't make it." "I know what you lost," Hayes said quietly. "We all lost something. But you gave us a chance to end it sooner. Command wants to recognize your contribution. They're calling it the Mercer system now, standard procedure for all forward repair units. You changed the way we fight." Mercer's jaw tightened. "Changed the way we break, too." Hayes studied him for a moment, then said, "You could come with me to London. There's a post-war engineering board forming. They want your input, aircraft innovation, civil flight development. A new age, Jack. You could help build it." Mercer finally looked at him, eyes hollow but burning. "Build something meant to fly instead of fall?" Hayes nodded. Mercer didn't answer right away. He turned to the half-dismantled plane before him, its metal gleaming gold in the dying light. Maybe that's worth trying. The colonel placed a hand on his shoulder. Reeves would have wanted that. Mercer didn't respond, but his silence wasn't rejection. 2 months later, the hangar stood empty. The wind howled through the rafters, scattering dust across the floor. The only thing left was Reeves' notebook, resting on a crate by the door. Mercer had copied its final page by hand before leaving. The sky doesn't belong to us. It only forgives us when we understand that. He took those words with him. Years passed. The war became memory. Airfields turned to farmlands, runways to highways. The world learned to fly without fear, though not without ghosts. New planes rose, sleek, shining, efficient, each one a descendant of the desperate machines Mercer had once coaxed back to life. He worked quietly in factories and test fields, his name appearing in reports and manuals but rarely on headlines. He designed systems that made maintenance faster, safer. Every engineer who followed his methods learned them without knowing the story behind the man who first drew them in blood and oil. Sometimes, at night, he would walk near the testing fields and listen to the engines roar. The sound still carried the same heartbeat. He'd close his eyes and hear Reeves' laughter somewhere in the distance, echoing in the wind. One winter, long after his hair had turned gray, Mercer returned to the old airfield. It was abandoned now, a place swallowed by weeds and silence. The hangar doors were rusted open. Inside, sunlight streamed through holes in the roof, illuminating dust like drifting stars. He walked to the center of the floor, boots echoing on cracked concrete. He could still see it, the lines of men working side by side, the sparks from welding torches, the laughter between air raids. Ghosts moved with him as he walked, shadows of a younger man chasing time with a wrench and a prayer. At the far end of the hangar, one plane remained under a tarp, forgotten by time. He pulled the cover away slowly. It was Reeves' old fighter, the paint faded, wings riddled with rust. The propeller creaked softly, as if sighing awake after a long sleep. Mercer touched the fuselage, his hand trembling. "You came back," he whispered. He climbed into the cockpit, the leather seat stiff beneath him. The controls were familiar, worn smooth by memory. For a long moment, he sat in silence, eyes closed, breathing in the ghost of oil and metal. "Reeves," he murmured, "we did it. You should see the skies now, filled with silver birds, faster than we ever dreamed. They don't fall anymore." A tear slipped down his cheek, catching the light like rain on glass. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the open hangar doors. The propeller turned once, creaking, then again, slow, soft, as if the plane itself remembered the rhythm of flight. Mercer smiled faintly. "Still alive," he said. "Still trying." He sat there until dusk, the sunlight fading from gold to gray. When he finally rose to leave, he turned for one last look at the machine that had carried so many hopes and fears. "Rest easy," he said quietly. "You earned it." Years later, historians would write about the Mercer system, a wartime innovation that reduced aircraft downtime by 75% and changed aerial warfare forever. They'd mention the efficiency, the logistics, the engineering brilliance. Few would speak of the sleepless nights, the lost friends, the man who refused to let machines, or people, die before their time. But sometimes, when an old pilot spoke to young cadets about courage and ingenuity, they told another version of the story. The one about the mechanic who fought the war not with bullets, but with stubborn faith and oil-stained hands. The one who turned broken wings into flight again. And somewhere, high above the clouds, where the sound of engines fades into eternity, Jack Mercer's legacy lived on. For every plane that took off safely, for every crew that made it home, for every quiet moment of peace between storms, there was a whisper in the wind, faint but certain. "Keep them flying." And the sky, vast and unbroken, answered in kind.